This is the beginning of podcast 3 for chapter 11. Now we're going to talk about some types of assessments we haven't mentioned yet. Student assessments are another way that we assess learning. Students observing each other, peer or teacher assessments, formal or informal observations are used. Event tasks are things that are called culminating experiences that are completed in a single class. Students have prior knowledge and they use those event tasks to extend their knowledge. Characteristics are they are specific, they demonstrate knowledge, they have authentic content, and they integrate knowledge from one thing to another. A culminating experience example is something like a dance routine or a gymnastics routine at the end of a class. Another example of student assessments are student journals, which is the opportunity for students to reflect. Usually that's done in standards 5 and 6, although now 5 and 6 have become standards 4 and 5. We take their feelings and perceptions and attitudes and they are able to journal about those things every day. The problem is that teachers must read the journal entries in order for them to be meaningful, and they also need to give their feedback to students after reading the journals. Another type of assessment are activity logs or logs. It could be logs in the weight room from one station to another, but it's a running record of activity. Many times we have students do activity logs outside of school as homework to show that they've engaged in activity. Student portfolios have become a common assessment, mainly in the elementary school, to show a representative collection of artifacts over time for each student. It shows growth and learning over time. It assesses all the standards. Students have a choice of the contents that they will put in their portfolios. They don't just dump everything in there that they've done in physical education, but they take their best work and put it together in there. They also write reflections about the reasons why they included certain assessments in their portfolios. Samples of assessments or artifacts going in the portfolios are fitness scores and projects. The disadvantage for teachers in particular is the storage of student portfolios and being able to keep them over time and from grade to grade in elementary school. Now that we have computers and can make digital portfolios, it is a little bit easier. However, you also need to have scanners and so on so that you can record and make hard copies in a digital form. Other types of assessments are written tests, which we've already talked about some. They sample student knowledge. Some examples of questions are true-false questions, multiple choice questions that are forced choice questions, so to speak, and essay questions that are easy to give because you just have to write out a few essay questions, but they're very difficult to grade because you have to come up with uh, a sample example written down so that you have something to go by. Projects and reports are also some types of assessments you can use, and they demonstrate cognitive knowledge. It is the opportunity for student creativity and cooperation. Skills tests are also a type of assessment. Sometimes the administration is a little bit harder because especially if you have large groups of students or numbers of students in your classes. It could be easy to administer if you know how to use time wisely as you administer skills tests. Interviews, surveys, and questionnaires are usually used as what we call debriefing assessments, or things that after the activity has gone on, to try to ask students about their feelings about things or how they contributed to the teamwork of the team or other things like that. We also have parental reports that verify physical activity homework. In other words, sending home reports to parents to make sure that the students are engaging in that physical activity homework that you have assigned them as homework. Making assessment practical is not easy, but what teachers need to do is establish the criteria for what they want to look at or what they want the end performance to look like. In other words, what is good performance? Use self-testing tasks frequently within lessons and within classes. Use simple check sheets and rating scales that students can use easily that don't have big paragraphs of information that they have to digest at one time. Using peer assessments helps to assess students in an informal way. Use 30-second wonders. In other words, at the end of class, in 30 seconds, have students write down everything that they learned in that particular lesson. You can use videotape and DVDs. Those are very helpful for when you're trying to analyze skills with a rubric or to use some type of skills test. You can also sample student behavior. In other words, use pedometers or heart rate monitors on only 5 to 10 students in the class instead of using them on every single student to see how much physical activity they've been doing. And also, you need to get comfortable with technology and the different types of technology instruments that we have in physical education for assessment. The reason I have this slide in here is that Dr. Rink mentions it in her book, but also because there is a bill in Congress right now to include physical education as one of the core subjects. If physical education is part of the core subjects, then we will have formal and high stakes testing in physical education. You need to familiarize yourself with the assessment materials, and most likely FitnessGram will be part of that high stakes testing. You need to familiarize the students with what they will be asked to do. You need to organize the class so that the assessment can be conducted efficiently and effectively. You need to record and organize data that you collect immediately. One good thing about FitnessGram is that it has a computer software program that allows you to collect and organize your data and put all of the data into that software very easily and quickly. You need to practice using the assessment instruments, and in FitnessGram that means there's several different tests in the fitness battery. You need to score student performance, follow the protocols for submitting data, and use the test as a learning experience for students, especially when you're practicing the test in class. This last slide of Chapter 11 is talking about student grading. Grades are used for different purposes. Students should be assessed on the criteria that is consistent with the teacher's program, course, unit, lesson objectives, and established ahead of time. The debate in physical education is what criteria will be used for grading students. Will it be student achievement toward achieving the goals of the class or the objectives of the class? Will it be student improvement on what the change in how they did from the pre-test to the post-test? Will you use student effort, which is a very abstract idea, and I would say you can't really measure effort. Same thing with student conduct. That's very difficult to measure. So, and also dressing out and participating. Not to say that dressing out in comfortable, safe clothes is not an important part of physical education and their programs, but it shouldn't be everything that we grade students on. We need to grade students on the objectives of the lesson and the objectives of the unit, and try to keep that as the focus of our assessment and evaluation. Before ending this podcast, I do have some advice for you interns that I hope will be very valuable. My advice is that assessment is just as important as planning. Most physical educators, particularly on the secondary level, don't assess enough in their physical education classes. We need to use assessments to see if we've reached the objectives of the class. Why teach physical education if you don't know what you're achieving? Pre and post testing is something that you're going to be doing in your internship too, and as a beginning teacher. As a beginning teacher, it's important because you're going to have to defend your program and justify your program when budget cuts come around. We try to get you to do pre-testing and post-testing and internship too to get you ready for that possibility as you become a beginning teacher. But it is important to see where students start from and where they end and how you are impacting students and their learning. That's the end of the podcast 3 on Chapter 11.